Howdy my totally tubular gamers, and we're back with yet again another ranking video, and today we're going to be talking Resident Evil. Now you know Resident Evil, everybody really knows Resident Evil, the most successful horror franchise in all of gaming, and in general it's one of the most successful horror franchises of all time. And today we're going to be talking about all the new games. Now we're going to be looking at all of the modern Resident Evil games. Resident Evil is a series that's really gone through a bunch of different iterations, and it's been at a lot of different points throughout its history. Like when it started, you know, it was that classic old school survival horror experience, and the series slowly moved to a more action focused one where finally it just became a straight up action game, and then it returned to horror. Today we're going to be looking at the modern Resident Evil games. I want to be looking at all of them, ranking them worst to best, and doing a little review on each one of them. Now when I say modern Resident Evil games, a lot of things could go through your head of what I mean by that. I consider the modern Resident Evil games this current revival of Resident Evil. So Resident Evil 7 and on. I'm looking at all the games released from RE7 and on. That's RE7, RE8, RE2 remake, RE3 remake, and now RE4 remake. And I'm definitely good off any of those multiplayer components with any of those games. But we're going to be looking at those 5 games. We're going to be just kind of basing them all off how scary they are, how's the gameplay, how's the puzzles, how does it hold up even just a couple years later. These are all the new games that you can totally play on any modern console or PC. I love Resident Evil. It's my favorite horror series of all time with Silent Hill, and so there's going to be people that are going to disagree no matter what I put on this list, and they're going to tell me I'm wrong or that I'm forgetting something. And so you know what, let me know down below. Let me know your favorite, like, share, comment, sub, all that great stuff. Let's just get right into it. Now none of these games I would say are bad, but what is the weakest of the modern Resident Evil games? And so here we have the Resident Evil 3 remake. Now I know, especially now with hindsight and the RE2 remake doing as well as it did, a lot of people have been kind of dunking on the Resident Evil 3 remake and saying it sucks. And I finally just played through it for the first time, and I gotta say, I thought it was actually pretty alright. Despite liking it though, I would say it is the weakest of the modern Resident Evil games, multiplayer aside. Now, I played the original Resident Evil 3 way back when, and I thought it was pretty alright, but I didn't think it was all that. I didn't think it was as great as Resident Evil 1 or 2. It wasn't even close in my opinion, but here we have the remake of the third game, still starring Jill Valentine as she's just trying to get out of Raccoon City before it gets destroyed, and she has this giant monster nemesis going after her. When it comes to the story, I think it's fine enough, but when it comes to the pacing, I think that something was just lost here from the original, and I feel like this game feels so much faster, a little rushed, and the pacing just wasn't there for me. The few times Nemesis does show up, I quite liked it, and I thought his introduction was actually great, and I still think Jill is a great character and one of the stronger female characters in video games. I thought she was very good. So when it comes to playing the game, it plays very similar to the RE2 remake. It just plays a little faster and it has a lot more action. The game is still a horror game. It definitely gave me a couple jumps, especially when Nemesis first shows up, but I wouldn't say it was anywhere near as scary as any of the other modern RE games. So the game is incredibly linear, and it has you moving through the city just trying to get out, and that's an amazing looking city, by the way. This game looks absolutely phenomenal. I will hype up that presentation. It just looks amazing. The presentation was superb. But yeah, you're moving through the city, you're fighting off zombies, you're getting into encounters, you're trying to survive and save your ammo, your resources, you're doing some puzzles, very, very basic puzzles I might add, and really just trying to get away from Nemesis a couple times. Something RE3 really lacks from RE2 is that sense of exploration. It just isn't really here because the game is so linear and just quick to move you to the next area, and you never go back to where you were. I'll tell you where you do go back though. If you played RE2, you go back to the police station for a brief moment, and it just kind of feels like RE3 just kind of reuses all the RE2 remakes assets in some way. And I mean, fair enough, the original game kind of did that as well, but I don't know, it's just a little more obvious here. At least I thought the shooting was actually really solid. It's just as good as it was in RE2, and a lot of the new enemies are fun to fight. And Nemesis, when he does show up, I actually thought it was pretty decent. Yeah, all of his sequences are scripted sequences, and the boss fights can be a bit lackluster, but I generally still thought that the encounters were fine enough. I just feel like this game doesn't really excel with all that much. It does everything fine, but doesn't really excel. I feel like it just goes too fast, it blows its load a little too early. Nemesis just isn't as present as I'd like him, especially in his human form. I feel like he's barely even there, and one reason that it does feel so fast is because they actually did cut stuff out of the original game and didn't replace it with anything. They just straight cut stuff out. And you know, I get it, sometimes you cut stuff out of remakes because it just doesn't really make sense, or modern sensibilities or all of that, but I just don't really see any reason for this one. Like, the game is just straight shorter because of it. This game is the shortest of any of the new Resident Evil games, and you can finish it in easily like 4 or 5 hours. There's also just nowhere near as much replayability. Overall, I'd say Resident Evil 3, the remake, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I would still say it's okay, and I'd still probably rather play it than the original, to be honest, but I wouldn't say that it's great or worth seeking if you don't love Resident Evil and haven't played it for some reason. And so here we have Resident Evil 8 Village releasing a couple years ago. Now, Resident Evil 7 totally reinvented the wheel. I was very excited to see how they would follow up with that and what they would do next. And where they went was definitely unexpected, with Lycans, Giant Lady D, and really just all the shit that goes down in RE8. The game takes place after RE7 and sees Ethan with Mia and their baby, and it's like they're just trying to have a happy life, and all of a sudden Chris busts in, pretty much fucks everything up and takes the baby, and you end up going after him, and he drops you off in this tiny little village, and there's werewolves, monsters, and just a whole lot of shit. I actually thought the story was pretty solid. I was pretty interested and intrigued to see what was going to happen next. Ethan, I think, was a bit of a stronger character here than in Resident Evil 7, but what really stole the show for me were the villains of Resident Evil 8. They're pretty infamous and iconic now to the series for a few reasons, but I really did think that the villains were actually all really good in this game, and I thought that they really propped this game up. Now, like RE7, it is a first-person game. It's a first-person horror game, and it definitely goes back to the roots of Resident Evil, where you're scrounging for ammo. You don't have a ton of ammo in this game, and you're really exploring these environments, and there's actually a lot to explore here, and you go through a variety of different environments, just trying to stay alive with all the monsters going on, solving some puzzles, which are pretty decent, getting into those awesome boss fights, and really just trying to find Chris, ultimately, is what it is. But I was constantly on the edge of my seat, wanting to see what was going to happen next. I was really intrigued by these environments. I think they're all pretty well designed. The boss fights are actually pretty solid too. Like, RE has never had amazing boss fights, but I actually thought these ones were pretty good, and I really just appreciated this game's pacing. Like, it always keeps things interesting, it's always doing something different, you're in a totally different environment like 1 or 2 hours later. It's got a solid length to it, and it was just a really enjoyable time, and the game scared the crap out of me numerous times, whether it was the beginning with all the Lycans, whether it was Lady D sneaking up on me, or even like at the very end of the game when you're in like the factory. I was like, oh my god, these things are just coming out of the walls. And one reason it's able to be so scary is the presentation. The presentation is just fantastic. I really enjoyed it. The actual like gunplay, the combat, I think it's fine enough. It is pretty weighted, it's pretty heavy. It doesn't absolutely rule like, say, the Resident Evil 2 or 4 remake, but I think that it's solid enough. You can actually play the game in third person now, which I have not tried yet, but I know it exists. And you get a decent variety of weapons, and you'll find yourself constantly upgrading and using the shop just like you do in RE4. Now, with this game being so great, why is it only this far on the list? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, I just think that the other Resident Evil games are a little better. That's just the truth of it. But also, there's a couple things I don't care for in this game. I'll just be real. There is a part where you play as someone other than Ethan, and I hated this. I thought this was just terrible, and I did not like it at all. There's also a pretty obvious plot twist or two, depending on if you're paying that much attention. And I just didn't really care for that. Really, like the end of the game, I just didn't care all that much for. And then I know there's the DLC that basically adds like nothing and is just kind of a waste of time. Really what I'm saying is that the game absolutely peaks in its first couple hours when you first arrive to the village with the werewolves and going up against Lady D. That's the best part of the game, in my opinion. That's where the game is at its highest point. And after that, it does have a few highs, but it doesn't get anywhere near as close as the first few hours, and it just kind of fizzles out by the end. At least in my opinion, I think it fizzles out by the end. But I still absolutely have no problem recommending the game. I still think the game is great. It is one of the best horror games of the last decade. It is still a superb time, and if you like scary games, you like Resident Evil, you like even anything horror adjacent, you're gonna like this game. And Lady D can step on me anytime, it'll be all good. I now have a mommy kink thanks to this game, so thank you, Capcom. And so here we have Resident Evil 7. I know it might be a little bit of a hot take to have this above Village, but I just think that 7's a little bit better. Now, Resident Evil 7, it really did kind of reinvent the wheel, and it went back to what made Resident Evil so popular to begin with after 6 was so different from what people expected from Resident Evil. 7 in a lot of ways felt like a reboot to Resident Evil, and it was the kick in the ass that the series absolutely needed, and it was thanks to this game that we have the modern revival of RE games. It felt like a reboot also in the story. The game does not have Chris or Leon as the main character, or Jill, or anyone you've seen before. It is this new character, Ethan. His wife passed away long ago, but he mysteriously receives a letter from her telling him to come to this house in the middle of like Louisiana in the bayous. And so he goes out into the swamps, and you know what? Mia's actually out there, but you know who else is out there? The Baker family, this crazy redneck family that is trying to kill you, mess with you, whatever it is, and it's up to Ethan to just find Mia and get the hell out of there. Now, I think the story to this game is actually pretty superb. Now, Ethan himself, don't get me wrong, he's not really that great. He doesn't really have a personality, and it's clearly supposed to be kind of more of an extension of the player. I mean, yeah, he does have a little bit of a personality and character growth, but it's nowhere near as much as, say, any other RE character. He was pretty whatever, but the rest of the story, I think it's all so good. Like, this game has so many iconic, memorable, awesome moments I can still recall nowadays, just thanks to how great they were. I think that the setting is absolutely amazing. Like, it is so different and unique from like any other horror game at the time. The atmosphere is really superb. Like, you really feel it when you're going through this game. Even nowadays, I'm just like, damn, that atmosphere was just so good. It hits so different. The Baker family they're just amazing. I love the Baker family. They're one of the best villains in any RE game. Like, the Baker family is just great. But it really was the atmosphere where I think this game absolutely killed it, and it allows this game to be, in my opinion, the scariest of all the Resident Evil games. Like, don't get me wrong, a lot of the Resident Evil games are scary, but I don't think any of the Resident Evil games have scared me as much as RE7. Like, this game absolutely just scared the shit out of me so many times. And it absolutely kept me on the edge of my seat, and I wanted to see what would happen next. When it comes to the gameplay, it was obviously very different from RE6 and RE5. The game was a bit more traditional, but it was also in first person, which was new. So yeah, it's in first person. The game feels a lot slower, a bit heavier, maybe even a bit clunkier compared to some of the other RE games. Very deliberate, of course. They want you to really feel the impact of everything and the weight of everything. And what you're really doing is you're exploring this giant house and the swamps around it, just trying to figure out where Mia is and get the hell out of there, like I said. But there's a lot more to it than that. You're going to be solving a ton of puzzles, a ton of good puzzles also, like some of the better puzzles of the Resident Evil series where I'm like, even I'm getting kind of stumped with these. You're going to be getting into encounters with these creatures known as the mold. There's no more zombies or anything like that. It's called the mold now. It's these really messed up looking creatures. And then you're also going to be interacting with the Baker family a lot, whether they're chasing you, playing traps with you, or just playing games on you. A lot of this game has you interacting with the Baker family, and all of these interactions are all great. I think that the boss fights are also pretty great. I mean, like, they're not amazing boss fights. It's that they're more memorable and have iconic moments to them rather than being, solid fights. I guess I'm saying the spectacle is there, and I thought that the spectacle absolutely was there for Resident Evil 7's boss fights. And the combat in general, I think, was pretty solid. Again, it is a bit slower and more weighted, but I thought that it was a lot more deliberate in that sense. And you're really going to be scrounging for ammo. You can really screw yourself over like the old RE games, which it had been a long time since you could do that. I really just think that this game had a ton going for it, and if you took a long time off Resident Evil and maybe you want to get back into it and you don't know where to start, this is a great place to start. I absolutely recommend this game, especially if you like anything horror and haven't tried it for some reason. No, Resident Evil 7 is a great one. And so here we have the RE2 remake. Now, the original Resident Evil 2, definitely one of the best Resident Evils, one of the best horror games of all time. So when they announced a remake, people went nuts. They went, this is either going to be awful or this is going to be amazing. And thankfully, it's the latter. Now, a lot of people have said a lot of things about RE2, but just to kind of regurgitate what they said in my own way, yeah, RE2 is pretty freaking amazing. This is not only one of the best Resident Evils, but one of the very best horror games ever made. And the game absolutely just kills it, and I have no problem saying just go play this game instead of the original game. The original game was cool and all, and it still aged pretty decently, but no, Resident Evil 2 Remake just blows everything out of the water. It is just a great time. For the one person who doesn't know, the game takes place after Resident Evil 1, and the zombie virus has totally just ravaged Raccoon City. There are zombies everywhere. The game stars Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield, both with their own stories and narratives, but really in the end, it's about both of them just trying to get the hell out of the city and as far away as possible. The story of Resident Evil 2 still absolutely holds up. This was before the series got like way too complicated and silly and goofy with its story. It was still pretty bite-sized and manageable here, and it still absolutely holds up. Like, I think it is a great story. The characters are great. The way they interact with each other is great. The villains are good. I have nothing but praise for the story and the characters too. I thought Leon and Claire were great. Claire in particular, I really liked her. Nothing but praise there. Same goes for the presentation. Game looks absolutely phenomenal. It looked mind-blowing when it came out. Even nowadays, game still looks amazing. Like, nothing but high praise there. And the music is also pretty solid here. Now, the actual gameplay, it is a very, and I mean very, faithful recreation of Resident Evil 2, just with modern sensibilities, a much better map system, and the game is from a third-person perspective. So yeah, it is a third-person shooter. Obviously, when it comes to the shooting and combat in general, it is significantly better than the original Resident Evil 2, and the game definitely has adapted to that with, you know, just really the fact that you can actually freely aim all over. But, you know, I think the shooting is actually pretty great in this game. I think the combat actually is pretty solid with a very good risk versus reward. Like, do you want to risk killing the zombie and maybe using up ammo or getting hurt so you can bypass the area later, like, easily? Or do you want to just kind of run past and you end up having to run past that zombie numerous times? I really did like the whole thing they had going on there. The combat, very solid. Gunplay, very solid. Now, the rest of the game is exploration. You're really exploring this police station for the most part, trying to figure out where to go next, trying to figure out where the next item is, or solving the next puzzle. Really, a lot of the puzzles come down to finding a ton of objects and putting them together in something, but I've always thought the puzzles of RE2 were solid enough. But I really do think that the exploration is actually really solid in this game. It might be the best of like the whole series. Like, the exploration's just great, and the way that they've updated that in this game, like telling you where items are when you pass them, and maybe if you want to come back to them later, like you don't got room now, or telling you if you've completely cleared out a room, and really just keeping track for you. That's great. I really appreciate it, and it makes this game a lot easier to digest and a lot easier to really just play and explore. And I just thought it was incredibly rewarding, whether you're Claire, whether you're Leon, whether you're on playthrough 1, playthrough 2, playthrough 5, it does not matter. The game is still incredibly rewarding with its exploration and puzzle solving. I thought that part was great. The pacing is really great in this game. Like, you're almost always doing something different almost every hour. Yeah, you know, there's a couple things obviously you're doing throughout, getting into combat, solving puzzles, collecting items, all that is there. But when it comes to the environment, when it comes to what exactly you're doing, yeah, things get mixed up quite a bit. They throw some curveballs in there, like some boss fights or when you go in the sewer, and you know, I think these are fine enough. I think they're more about the spectacle also, but I think they were more than fine enough, and I really just wanted to see what was going to happen next, even though I already kind of knew. But the pacing was superb. I thought the horror was actually great. This game has an incredible atmosphere, just like RE7. It's different from RE7, but I still think the atmosphere was very well done. The game scared me numerous times, and the game had me tense throughout, especially that B playthrough where Mr. X is just after you the whole time. Like, Mr. X in particular just goes so hard in this game. Like, in the original game, I remember him, but I don't really remember all that much about him. Here, I'm just like, holy shit, Mr. X is going to fuck my shit up, and I'm going to die. Mr. X is just so well done in this game, like, truly amazing. Like, this is what Nemesis should have been, but you know what, that's conversation for a different day. I have nothing but high praise for this entire game, honestly. It is one of the very best horror games for a reason. I have no problem recommending this game if you just like video games in general. Even if you're not a horror guy or horror gal or horror whatever you identify as, just check out this game. Do yourself a favor and play the Resident Evil 2 remake. I don't think you'll regret it because it's just a great time. But then they up and remade Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is like my favorite Resident Evil of all time. It's the one I have the most memories with, the most nostalgia with. It's the one I've replayed the most. It's like my favorite horror game of all time. So I was pretty inclined to already like the Resident Evil 4 remake. But I can come in here and tell you, holy shit, the Resident Evil 4 remake, like the original game was obviously really freaking good, but this game is still just so good, even nowadays. Like, I still thought Resident Evil 4 aged great. Like, I still thought it was still great to play nowadays, but Resident Evil 4 Remake, like, oh my god, I am just fucking blown away with this game. This game is absolutely phenomenal, and there are probably plenty of people in the comments ready to roast me like, no, RE2 Remake's better, Resident Evil 7 is the better atmosphere, how could you love RE4 Remake this much? Well, I do. I really do. Resident Evil 4 Remake is just a fantastic game. The game still is the same plot about Leon Kennedy, now battle-hardened and really trained up, going after the president's daughter, trying to find her in this crazy world, and a bunch of BS goes down. I'll just leave it at that. The story, it's definitely a bit less campy than the original. It definitely has a lot more of a horror atmosphere and vibe going to it, but it still has plenty of charm. There is still a ton of one-liners. Luis is still great. Like, the story is just excellent here. It is great. It is tense. The atmosphere is totally different from the originals. Like, the original had a pretty iconic atmosphere, but this is just something different altogether, and I love it. I think it is great. I think the atmosphere is great. The presentation is just superb. I have nothing to say other than it's just fantastic. It really is just fantastic. And when it comes to playing the game, it does play pretty similar to Resident Evil 4 in many aspects, but it's definitely been tweaked, it's been modernized, and it's been updated, and it just feels absolutely amazing. Not only can you move and shoot now with a modern control scheme, but Leon himself can do way more things. Like, he's out here backflipping, you can suplex anybody instead of just a few people. And then probably the biggest addition is that he can parry just about everything, and there's even knife durability here, which is just great. This is a great system, and I actually really enjoy it. Leon can be stealthy now, so he's not just running in and kicking the hornet's nest like in the original, and the shooting mechanics are like the best of the entire franchise, like not even close in my opinion. I think that the shooting mechanics and the general combat is just absolutely phenomenal. Like, it totally holds up, and it is so good. Like, it is so engaging, it's fun, it's challenging, it's rewarding, it's satisfying. It is everything you are looking for. The weapons feel great, they look great, they sound great, they handle great, they all are different from each other. It is excellent. Taking out mobs of these fools, it is just a great time when you're just roundhouse kicking a bunch of them off the stairs, or when you're blowing their face off with a sniper, or when you're just gunning them down with the TMP or the shotguns, or then you get the magnums in there, and it's like, it doesn't matter if you got the giant worm thing coming out of your head, you're blowing them off. Like, it is just a great time. I genuinely have not had this much fun with Resident Evil in quite some time. Like, I loved the other ones. I had a ton of fun with them, but this was just something else. This was just something else. And you know what it was? It was Resident Evil 4, but even better. And then you go through all the varied environments. They throw a bunch of traps and little gimmicks. There's a ton of boss fights here. Like, this game is constantly mixing it up for its 15 or so hour campaign. It's still got a really good length to it. It is pretty long. I know some people might say it's a little too long, but I've always loved the length of Resident Evil 4. I love how it keeps things interesting as you go from the village to the castle to the island. And along the way, you're finding a bunch of treasure. There's the merchant, stranger, of course, and upgrading Leon is like a game in itself. They've even gamified it more here, and like, it's just so much fun to just upgrade Leon and his guns and get everything super powerful, and playing with the item chest. Yeah, you can auto sort, but I mean, you can sort like the good old days also. The game actually does add a number of side missions as well that you can find more than just shooting the blue medallions, and this allows you to get more stuff from Stranger. What are you buying? And you know, I just really enjoyed all of it. I enjoyed the new stuff. I enjoyed some of the stuff they brought back, of course. They didn't bring everything back. There were a few things I remember from the original game that aren't here, like a boss fight or two. But I think that the way that they've put everything together is just fantastic. Some areas, it's like one-to-one recreation. Other areas, it's like totally new. In fact, a boss fight is totally new, and I thought it was great. And then on top of that, the game recommends you play on hardened if you played the original. I played the original a couple times, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna play on hardened. This game is not fucking around. Like, when you're on hardened, you will die in like 2 or 3 hits. This game is way harder than the original. It is way more intense, and it's just relentless, especially once you get to like the castle. Like, this game just becomes absolutely relentless. It does not let up, and you will find yourself going, the battle's over, like every single time. Like, it was draining, and I was just like, oh my god, dude, the combat is so good in this game. The encounters are so well done. Like, even all these years later, they're just expertly well done. Leon's a total badass. Ashley, she's actually nowhere near as annoying or frustrating to deal with as she was in the original. She's actually way better. You barely even like look over her, to be honest. It really wasn't a problem. And I'll be real, I could just go on and on with this game. I could really just continue to gush and rant and talk about it for like 6 or 7 minutes because I just had such an amazing time. Again, RE4, like my favorite horror game of all time. It's been remade now, and this remake, it's like better than the original. It's better than the original. It is just an amazing time. I have absolutely no problem saying, go play this game. Like, it does not matter who you are, go play this game. The original was phenomenal. This is phenomenally, or I don't know how to say it. You know what? I'm finishing up here because I'm just going off. I'm sucking the game's dick at this point. Does the game have anything wrong? I mean, I guess, maybe. I'll come back to you with that one, what I dislike about the game. But Resident Evil 4, as of this moment, is my game of the year. But Spider-Man 2, though. Spider-Man 2 is going to be the game of the year. But if you're going to do anything after today, find a way to play Resident Evil 4. It is just amazing. This remake is just amazing. One of the best remakes of all time, along with RE2. In fact, all of these games outside of really the RE3 remake are just all excellent, and I recommend them all. Resident Evil, it is crazy how it has really entered a new golden era, more than even like the original era of Resident Evil. It's just blown up and is just phenomenal. Resident Evil, one of my favorite series of all time. Play all these games. They're all great. If you made it to this part of the video, comment bricks as in what you used to build a house. Shout out to my one Patreon. Thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful night.